Hi, Lauren. This is Ira, and I'm recording here my audio feedback on your statement of belief, which I hope will be helpful to you as you complete final revisions on the major essay for the course, the Defining Good Argument in Digital Contexts essay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through my reading of your statement of belief and highlight some of the things that I think you're doing that are really cool or interesting, and also articulate a couple points where I want to press you or challenge you. Not because there's a problem with this as the assignment that it is. It's a perfectly good statement of belief. But because I want you to kind of be thinking even more systematically in a few ways as you move towards completion of the Defining Good Argument in Digital Contexts theoretical essay. Okay, so one of the things that you do that's really helpful is you've got a very clear definition of what is a good argument. A good argument consists of effectively and respectfully conveying thoughts and information that allows both parties to walk away with some new positive piece of information. And that's really interesting because I like the idea that what's at stake is both parties should be changed in some way, and not just any old way, but some way that's positive. Now, that said, this notion of some new positive piece of information doesn't really get developed a whole lot here. So I'm going to kind of probably come back to that a couple times as I'm reading through to kind of press you on places where you might do that. Here you also distinguish between a good, valid, and effective argument. And from a systematic perspective, I'd be interested to know what you see as the meaning of those three words. How are they distinct? What makes them each what they are? Why do they all go together here? I like also this notion that there's what's at stake is both some verbal things that are happening in the argument, and verbal, we might say written also, right? If you're thinking about like an argument in the comment section somewhere. We might also say visual. If you're going to say maybe if a meme can be an argument, then there's not even always words. So we're going to say probably some of the, maybe we'll say symbolic rather than verbal. I don't mean to push you toward Burke, but there is kind of a Burkean sense that symbolic covers verbal, covers visual, covers written, etc. But anyways, so having logic and reasoning to back up your views, and I'm interested in what you see as the difference between logic and reasoning, by the way. And I'm not sure why you should always try to walk away knowing something you didn't know before, why that is a verbal thing, how that fits. So that's at the level of the system, I'm a little confused there. That seems much more like it's some examples of nonverbal elements, things like open-mindedness, respect, and the fact that we owe it to each other the opportunity to listen to what other people have to say. This you might want to look for a little bit cleaner way to articulate it. I think you're saying the fact that we owe it to each other to listen to one another, or we owe each other the opportunity to change. I'm a little confused about exactly what this means. And then commodious space, which you're drawing on Corder and developing this sense of what the space is, which I think is really cool. And I'm looking forward to seeing how you develop that when you're talking about digital contexts. What kind of argument in digital contexts fosters this commodious space, and what kind of argument in digital context shuts it down? What does that look like? Now you say, you talk then both above and then down here at some length in terms of open-mindedness and what's at stake. And I like the idea that we don't have to agree or like or honestly even really care, but that what's at stake is somehow we need to want to learn something new. And I'd be interested. I think this paragraph gets a little muddled because the example doesn't perfectly match up with this sentence, right? If you don't have to agree, like, or care, but then your example is one that know something, I think there's a little more working out of how these two things fit together. But either way, I think this idea that there's an ability and desire to learn new things that's at the core of what argument is, or what good argument is, I think that's really important, and I hope you'll develop that a little further and a little more deeply. I'm looking forward to that. And then you kind of come back to quarter and think in terms of argument as emergence. Now, in general, for the statement of belief, this is totally fine. This is just a statement of belief. You didn't need to quote quarter at all anyways. But in the larger theoretical essay, if you're quoting quarter, or when you're quoting quarter or another theorist, you definitely want to make sure to follow up by explaining the quote. So this is a pretty long block quote from quarter, and it's important to say, what does it mean? What should we do with that quote? How do you want us to read quarter? How is this quote related to what you're saying good argument is, or what you're saying diversity and perspective is, or what you're saying open-mindedness is, or commodious space, etc. No, I'm just going to go down a little bit forward. I think it's really interesting. The way that you're cashing out the idea of respect here is a little bit different from the way you do above. If you kind of go back up and look, they kind of cash out a little differently. And this is a very interesting way to think about respect. So you're saying it's not okay to deny the other party or parties the opportunity to have their point of view changed or even slightly altered. So this idea that what respect is we owe it to one another to give each other opportunities to change, I think it's really interesting. I think it's a really cool way of thinking about respect. I like that a lot. And I'd like to see you talk more about that, expand on that, explain how that works. Especially since you say you believe respect is the core principle of rhetorical analysis, and given your argument, I totally agree. I think that the way you're thinking about good argument that's quite correct. It's founded in this very particular way of thinking about respect. So I'd just like to hear you kind of cash that out a little further, unpack the idea a little more, because I think you're saying something really interesting, and I'd like to hear more about it. Now, here we kind of start to move towards effectivity. And it kind of reminds me as a reader, oh shit, up front you said we're going to talk about goodness, validity, and effectivity. And now we've been talking, I think, about goodness. We never really talked about validity. Here we are on effectivity. And it kind of reminds me, I'm not really sure, going back to the very beginning, how the different pieces fit together. So I want to really make sure that when you're working on your final revisions for your Defining Good Argument in Digital Context essay, that you're sort of making sure that you have a very clear top-level definition and a very clear sense of what the specific components of that definition are. And then again, as you go through the essay, it's really clear at any given moment, which is not right here, just to clarify. But you want to make sure that at any given moment, it's really clear how the different moments fit back in with that top-level definition. Okay? Because that's part of what makes the essay. And again, that's not a problem with the statement of belief. It's fine. The statement of belief is just you thinking out loud. But for the coherent theoretical essay, your whole job is to really develop a rigorous, systematic understanding. And what that means is that each of the parts needs to be well connected to the other parts. And probably a little more like the explanation of well, what are these things? What is logical reasoning? Or what is logic and reasoning to back up your views? What does that consist of? Right? So if you believe the earth is flat, even if you do have reasons why you think that is, can it still be a good argument? So if you believe something we know is not true, let's say for instance, that the earth is flat. We know that that's not the case, right? Insofar as we know anything. That's one of the things we know, Now you can say, well, we don't really know anything, and that's fine, but to the extent that we do, that's one of the things that we know. So can you make a good argument for an untrue conclusion? And I think that's an interesting and maybe important question. Is it possible to offer a good argument for an untrue conclusion? Can you have good reasons for a false statement? Can you have logic on your side for a false statement? I think that there's a lot to be said there about how we argue in digital contexts in particular. And then kind of coming back to this idea of what a person, an arguer, should be looking for, is, both successfully proving my point, which, by the way, is a lot stronger than what you've been saying before this. So I wonder, successfully prove my point? I'm not sure. That's stronger than just have reasons and some logic, right? But anyways, so what you're saying is we should always try to walk away from an argument knowing something we didn't know before. And so what we're trying to do is learn something new. We're not trying to just shoot down each other's beliefs, you say, down here. We're trying to have a kind of a transformative exchange. And again, I love that idea of good argument. But I also wonder, can you do without effectivity? Can you have a transformative exchange without effectivity? If both parties came to the argument with true open-mindedness, but nobody changed their mind about anything, there was no effectivity of any of the arguments, was it a good argument? Or if multiple parties, I shouldn't say both sides, because like we've talked about, it could be lots of sides, but the same question. So we want to say everyone should walk away with something good or positive, and here I would want to know a little bit more. Okay, cool, fine, fair enough, I'm sold, but what does that mean? What does it mean to walk away with something good or positive? Like, what is that exactly? So, anyways, with all that in mind, I really enjoyed reading this. I think you're puzzling through some smart and important and interesting stuff, and I'm really looking forward to reading your fuller definition soon. Thanks.